Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are going to get started in just a moment. Just going to give folks a second to log in here. And I see folks coming in the room. Okay. All right. We have a nice group of people who've already joined. So I'm going to get us going so we can give as much time as possible to this amazing presentation we have tonight. So hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's presentation, Understanding Sleep for Adults with Tics, the Science of Sleep and a Spinning Mind. My name is Alexandra Walsh, and I am the Manager of Programs at the Tourette Association of America. And I'll also be your moderator for tonight's program with the help of my colleague Dao Duong during the Q&A. Participants will have the ability to engage in a Q&A discussion with our presenter at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to place your questions in the Q&A box throughout the presentation. We also ask that you please take the time to fill out a brief survey at the end of the presentation. The QR code for the survey will be displayed for you on the screen, and your responses provide us feedback on our programming that allows us to host more programming like it in the future. Excuse me. Tonight's presenter will be Ben Mooney. Ben is an occupational therapist and coach. He has 23 years of experience in the field of occupational therapy and has operated Mooney Wellness, LLC, since 2022. Ben specializes in sleep, personal coaching, and most importantly, listening to those he works with presence and attunement. In 2024, Ben became CBIT certified to meet his goal of expanding his services to people with Tourette syndrome. Ben has level 1 training in internal family system, uses cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, and melds the two modalities into a practical approach to management of sleep issues. He completed his training with the PICSA Coaching Institute in 2023, where he practiced the methodology of IFS and coaching. Ben also has Tourette syndrome and brings a lifetime of wisdom, compassion, and empathy for those with Tourette syndrome. When not working, Ben is an avid skier, a world traveler, parent of 3 children, husband to an amazing social worker, and a guitarist with a love for adventure and new experiences. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Ben to get us started. Thanks so much, Ben.
Hey, thanks so much for that awesome intro, Alexandra. I appreciate that. And thanks to everyone that's shown up tonight. I appreciate you guys taking time out of your schedule and being here. So I'm going to talk about sleep and sleep and a spinning mind. Oops, I'm not getting my slides to work here. So bear with me here, guys. See if this one. Oh, there we go.
There you
go. All right. So I'll have to adapt here a little bit, but that's all right. Anyhow, my agenda for tonight. First of all, I'm going to talk about the complexities of sleep. And there's only so much time for me to talk tonight. So there's going to be things that I'm going to be able to cover and things that I can't. And I'll try to explain a little bit more about why I can't cover those things too. I want to talk about why sleep is difficult for adults with Tourette syndrome and tic disorders. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on homeostatic sleep drive and the science behind sleep. And I'm going to talk about spinny minds, or kind of active minds, anxious minds, mental health, and sleep. And finally, have some time for discussion and questions. So I want to encourage you to please ask questions. Write them in the comments. If for some reason you feel uncomfortable about writing them in the comments, on my website, mooney-wellness.com is a phone number. It's my cell phone number. I encourage people to call and talk to me. I love when I get calls from people, and I love talking about sleep. So whether it's tonight, or if it's maybe your doctor, or maybe you start thinking about this and realizing you need to do something more to address your sleep needs, I just want to encourage you to ask questions tonight. Ask them whenever. Talk to a healthcare professional. Sleep is so important, so please consider asking questions. So my why for why I'm here, what I do, I have Tourette syndrome, I have OCD, and if I think about my adult life, and I kind of shine a spotlight on the areas that I've had the most trouble with in my adult life. Um, I've I've had a lot of issues with the kind of like that this longing to fit in. And I spend a lot of time thinking about, you know, how I'm going to fit in with my tics and how I'm going to move into this new work setting or potentially move into a new relationship. And when am I going to introduce the the topic that I have Tourette syndrome uh with a new girlfriend, for instance? Or, when my wife and I were talking about the idea of having kids, I spent so much time thinking about um, what if I have a child with Tourette syndrome? And with the OCD, it's real easy for me to kind of perseverate on that. So there's a lot of trends that I've led in my adult life that um, have really kind of caused me trouble and struggle, and my coping hasn't always been the most healthy. So I really hope that maybe if I can connect with somebody that's watching this and offer something that might be a little healthier or a little more scientific and add value and help you with your experience, especially with sleep. I really hope that that's accomplished. So by the end of this evening, I really hope that you have more of a foundation of the science of sleep and an understanding of the Tourette brain. And also, I hope that you have the confidence to go and talk to your doctor about it, and maybe you'll have some specific things that you can say, or to talk to somebody or talk to a therapist about it, and have some really concrete ideas of things you can work on. So that's kind of my why for tonight. So sleep is really complex, and unfortunately, there's probably going to be people that are watching this, and I may not offer one tidbit of information that's going to help you in your particular case. And I hope that's not the case. But the thing is that sleep is complex and we're all different. And I really want to try to present tonight on a real general picture of sleep problems in the population, especially with mental health and especially with the way our Tourette brains are wired. But it is complex. And so I'm going to do my best to cover as much as possible. But I recognize and I hope that you understand that it's really hard to talk about everybody's case in a way that can be helpful. So Dr. Andy Galpin um, did such a good job of summarizing sleep issues. Um, he basically broke it down into 4 different aspects. One of them is psychology, one of them is physiology, one's pathology, and one's environment. So it's really a nice, simple way to look at sleep. And you notice I have these stars circled. And I'm going to try to talk about each of these areas of sleep. But throughout my presentation, there's going to be incomplete details because 1, time, and 2, we don't have all the answers. And every individual that is working on their sleep has their own elements that they bring. And in some cases, um, it's really confusing and it's really difficult. And so I have a lot of empathy for people when they work on sleep. Um, I'm primarily going to focus on the psychology. And I'm going to really focus on kind of like the Tourette brain, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD, depression, some of those like ruminating symptoms of sleep and ways that we can learn to use our body to work through that. But when you think about like psychology, the mental health, the behavioral practices, comorbidities, chronotypes, social factors, um, it's it's a really big, vast field. Same with physiology, hormones, medications, deficiencies. I oftentimes have to recommend for people to get blood work and and sometimes there's supplementation and nutrition and hydration. There's so much to this. Talking about pathology and abnormal like for instance apneas. When I first meet with somebody, we'll do a screening tool, and if we find out in that screening tool that their problem is sleep apnea, their number 1 problem is sleep apnea, behavior for in mental health isn't going to help opening somebody's airway and getting breath in. And so there's a lot of complications for managing the pathologies of sleep as well. And so anyhow, I'll do my best to include information to help with that, but it is really hard and it's really complex. And finally, environment. There's so many factors in environment: the temperature of the geography of where somebody lives, the humidity, air particulates, allergens, carbon dioxide levels of how somebody breathes and has that carbon dioxide cloud around them. And then of course all the sensations and sounds and smells and so on and so forth. So again, I'm going to try my best to summarize as much as I can in this presentation, but just recognize that there's some limitations too. So why is sleep difficult for people with Tourette syndrome and tic disorders? First of all, there's so much that we still need to learn how to understand. There's just so much more research. And the more familiar we get with brain science and understanding human behavior, the more we recognize that there's just a lot more that needs to be understood. And when you look at studies on sleep in people with tic disorders, there's a huge variety of data. Sometimes the data might indicate that 50% of the Tourette population has sleep problems. Sometimes the data might indicate that 80% of the population has tic disorder or with tic disorders has sleep problems. So there's a lot of variance from test to test, and it's still not completely clear across the board. In some tests, bruxism or teeth grinding is the most common complaint. In other tests, parasomnias or nightmare disorders are the most common. So again, there's a lot of variation when you look at different testing and different research. So we still need to learn more. And there's so many wonderful researchers out there that are working really hard, and especially with the Tourette community. So it's promising, but there's still a lot that needs to be learned. So approximately 25 to 30%, 25 to 35% of the population with Tourette and tic disorders have clinical complaints of sleep problems. In other words, they need clinical intervention. They're working with their doctor. There's either medications or there's protocols and therapies, or it's being addressed as part of their healthcare plan. There's common trends with sleep problems: falling asleep, like the initiation of sleep at the beginning of the night is a big problem for folks with Tourette and tic disorders. Staying asleep in the middle of the night is a big problem. And then daytime sleepiness is also a really big problem. Those tend to be the three major issues that are standing out for folks with Tourette and tic disorders and sleep. Generally speaking, and again, I'm going to use a lot of stereotypical generalizations tonight, but co-occurring conditions tend to increase the severity of sleep issues in our population. In particular, ADHD and OCD, they tend to be the most common ones that really lead to increased reports of sleep problems. Also, anxiety, depression, deficits with emotional regulation are really common, and those tend to be common when people struggle with sleep. Those problems tend to stick with the adults. I know sometimes with tic severity, for instance, as kids kind of go through the peak of their tic severity and start moving into adulthood, for a lot of folks with Tourette syndrome, the tic severity gets better, and then maybe some of their other problems, like sleep, for instance, aren't as bad. But a lot of times what research is showing is that anxiety, depression, emotional dysregulation still tend to stick around a little bit more in adults that have that Tourette diagnosis. Our body's still moving even when we want to be still. Duh, right? This is something that I would imagine anyone that's watching this with Tourette syndrome has a story about, or many stories about, trying to get to a point of relaxation, being ready to fall asleep, and then your body moves and it tics, and you feel that tick repeating, and then you start getting frustrated and you start building that cortisol and getting angry and then kind of going into the woe is me. I can relate because this is something that's very familiar for me in my history. And so it's really hard when you know you're tired and you feel that need to sleep and then your body is still moving. Medications. So here's one list of many medications that are used for Tourette syndrome and tic disorders. And if you notice the list, almost all of these have a common side effect of insomnia. And even the ones that don't have a common side effect of insomnia typically have drowsiness or daytime lethargy as part of their diagnosis or as part of their side effects. So medications are a big piece of this puzzle. And I truly, truly believe that sleep is the best medication that we have access to. When you think about the people that have created the medications, they're targeting neurotransmitters and they're targeting specific things, the same things that are regulated the best through sleep. So yes, these medications are important, and in so many cases they're really helpful, they're really necessary, but sleep really is the ultimate best medication because it has such a profound effect on all of the different brain areas and all the different neurochemicals that we're trying to target through medication. So when I talk about insomnia, I use the 30-30-30 rule. So if it takes more than 30 minutes to fall asleep, if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're awake for more than 30 minutes, or if you wake up 30 minutes prior to your intended time to wake up, that would be, and you do that, 3 or more times in a week, that's that is clinical insomnia. That's a real easy way of understanding clinical insomnia. So when you see my slides and they say insomnia on it, that's kind of how I define it. So neurochemistry. We have us folks with Tourette syndrome have more complicated neurochemistry. So I always use the example of sandboxes and sand with dopamine. We have an overactivity of dopamine in our striatum and other cortical circuits. So when I talk about dopamine, I usually use the sandbox versus the shovel analogy. And when we're anticipating events, when we're thinking about when like for those of us with OCD, when we're anticipating or thinking or kind of ruminating about the next day or events or things that go through our mind that spins, usually there's so much more dopamine in those cases than when we actually experience the actual event. And then our brain releases dopamine. It's a small fraction of the dopamine that we use compared to when we anticipate. So we have a little bit of a disadvantage with how our brains use dopamine. And of course, with our predisposition, it happens that we spend a lot of time anticipating and thinking and ruminating, generally speaking. And then add adulthood to this. So sex, drugs, rock and roll, there's a lot of complexities to being an adult. And in adulthood, we're making extremely challenging decisions about relationships, social norms, jobs and work. And there's a lot of dopamine involved in these decisions and anticipating and acting. We have essentially nobody telling us we can't do this stuff. So it's also real easy to fall into patterns where our drives with our dopamine are left unchecked. And so it's real easy again there's a lot of themes with our population and excessive dopamine and habits that are reflective of getting sleep. The worst decisions make the best dopamine, as they say. Serotonin is also an interesting part of our chemistry. We have decreased serotonin neuromodulation. And serotonin, it's kind of like that afternoon feel-good neuromodulator that kind of helps you sort of ease into the evening. Additionally, serotonin is really important in melatonin synthesis, so in initiating sleep drive. So we have decreased levels of serotonin, and so that really plays a profound impact too in our chemistry. Serotonin and dopamine, the two things that make you happy by definition. Finally, neural circuitry. So we have feedback loops in our neural circuitry that really increase sleep challenges. And so I'm going to use, I live in Denver, but this is Colorado Springs. This is their bus map. And the bus routes make these loops, and then they circle back to the stations, and they keep making loops all day. And I like using this example when it comes to neurochemistry. So if you think about this like your brain likes to have these cyclic feedback loops, and it sends signals. And I'm going to use the main station here to represent our basal ganglia. So many of our circuits and our loops that we have go through our basal ganglia, which is basically our motor cortex, our association, limbic, and emotional circuits. So really our movements, our habits, and our emotions. And when you think about these loops that are going around, and you think about the fact that inside of our basal ganglia, there's this excessive dumping of dopamine, you can really easily understand how tics happen. We have feedback loops going on, and as these loops pass through, and there's all this extra dopamine, they just kind of speed through, and we don't have that filter and that regulation. So then you add cortisol and dopamine and create a little bit more of an easiness to spin in our minds. So first of all, when you look at the studies on adults with Tourette and tic disorders, they tend to have more cortisol than most humans have. And it makes sense if you think about, like, having Tourette syndrome. It's really easy to kind of stress a little bit more, and to think, how am I going to adapt with my tics? How am I going to fit into these groups? And so we naturally are producing a little bit more cortisol. And then with the dopamine, and as you think about these loop systems, there's, in the basal ganglia, there's sort of like a red light, green light for our movements and our emotions. And with the dopamine being there and flooding, it's so easy for the messages, the chemical messages, to come through, and for our brain not to be able to filter it, and there's a little bit more of a green light effect, and then the tic comes out, or we're a little bit more emotionally out of control. We're a little bit, we fluctuate a little bit more with our emotions. And then when you add sleep in, during REM sleep, our brains are actually 30% more active than they are when we're in an alert state during the day. So when you have REM sleep, for instance, and you have these systems, people tic in their sleep. And also there's this large correlation, this is my theory, but there's a large correlation on like nightmare disorders and emotional, like, big dreams that are so, like, big and uncomfortable. They wake us up, and sleepwalking and sleep talking. This is such a common thing with folks in the Tourette population. And really, it kind of makes sense that when we are sleeping, we are a little bit more frail than people in the average population. It's a little bit, our neurochemistry makes sleep a little bit harder for us to stay in deeper sleep. So again, there's such an importance of understanding sleep in folks with Tourette syndrome, and there's such an importance in working on it and being very diligent and aware of sleep. And then, of course, there's the complexities of being an adult. and making big decisions and making difficult decisions and having more freedom and staying up later and being able to do that and being able to have access to whatever chemicals or drugs or choices and relationships. It's a really complicated thing. So again, sleep is complex. Um, so I like to talk about a behavioral explanation for insomnia, to help understand a little bit more about, um, first, just awareness of insomnia with minds that are extra active, and then also hopefully it can reinforce just how important it is and how we need to take it seriously. So first of all, when you look at this model, there's that threshold line. That threshold line represents insomnia. So for anybody that's above that threshold line, they have insomnia and it's clinical insomnia. And so hopefully as I go through this, it'll make more sense. So first of all, we all have a predisposition. We're all predisposed to insomnia, and basically some of us have a little bit more hyperactivity in our nervous systems, and some people are a little more calm and chill. I know people that are very relaxed and very chill, and they just kind of hit a stressor and they just move right along and they keep going. And their predisposition is probably a little bit lower when it comes to insomnia versus me, and a lot of folks that have Tourette and tic disorders, where I tend to be a little bit more emotionally dysregulated, and I tend to be a little more hyperactive. And so already, just how I show up physiologically, I'm closer to that threshold of insomnia. So that's predisposition. And then we have precipitation. So for a lot of humans, this might be a trauma in their life, and something traumatic happens to them, and suddenly they're not sleeping and they're overwhelmed by the trauma. Or sometimes, like I, sometimes I talk to kids and their parents are going through a divorce, and the kids are really worried about the divorce, and they're so worried when it's time to fall asleep, they're just thinking and thinking, and so there's this precipitating event, and it's causing them to not get good sleep. And I like to think about like Tourette as, for me at least, my explanation is right around when I got diagnosed. I started thinking, why is this happening? This isn't fair. And how am I going to show up? And how are people going to judge me? And there was this rush of emotions that precipitated insomnia for me. And so I spent a lot of time in that state. But what happens is we perpetuate these things, and we start doing this on a regular basis. We start trying to solve our problems, and we start trying to anticipate how conversations might go at work the next day, or maybe we rehash things, or we're doing something on social media, and we're thinking over and over about that and maybe how it influences us. And so we perpetuate our insomnia through that regurgitation and rumination of trying to analyze and understand things. And then finally, there's a conditioned behavior. And so what happens is we do this over and over again so much that we start associating going to bed with, I'm going to go to bed and I'm going to think about money, and I'm going to think about relationships, and I'm going to think about social things. Or in some cases, we start using other compensatory strategies like drinking or drugs or binging on Netflix, and it becomes part of our conditioned behavior, and it impacts our sleep. And so we often do these things and we're not aware of the psychological component of this. We just act and it feels good, and we're trying to numb out, we're trying to solve our problems, we're trying to figure things out. But what happens is we start doing this on a regular basis, and it's contributing to our insomnia. So I'm not going to read this, but Matthew Walker, the book Why We Sleep, is an amazing book about sleep. And I've read it a few times and I just absolutely love it. But really, sleep is responsible for so much. As far as wellness goes, there's really not anything involved in wellness that sleep doesn't profoundly impact. So, warding off disease, um, minimizing, like, there's a correlation to bad sleep and dementia. There's a correlation to bad sleep and cancer. Um, if you're trying to exercise and you have the best personal trainer in the world, but you're not getting good sleep, it's so much harder to show up and to do a good job and to stay consistent. Same thing with diet. If you're not getting good sleep, it's so hard to follow a diet and to have the mental strength to stay on track. And then of course there's so many health correlations to poor sleep too. So sleep is really important. I'm not going to go into too much depth on exactly what sleep does for the body, but it's just safe to say that sleep is absolutely critical for health in every way. And again, it's the best medicine. So I want to move on to homeostatic sleep drive because I really believe that this paints a great picture for what we're trying to understand when it comes to our sleep and how it affects our routine. So first of all, there's adenosine. Adenosine is a neuromodulator that is in our brain, and when you wake up in the morning, you have low levels, and then as you continue through the day and you continue moving and thinking and working, the adenosine builds in your brain, and you finally get to a certain point where when you fall asleep, it's usually like the switch takes place and you have so much adenosine in your brain that ultimately you have so much pressure you have to fall asleep. So there's several things that have impacts on adenosine. First of all, caffeine. When adenosine binds to the brain with receptors that kind of bind like puzzle pieces, and caffeine actually has the same receptors. So when you drink caffeine and it's floating around in your nervous system, those caffeine receptors bind to your brain and they stay inside of they stay binded to your brain, and what happens is it blocks the ability for more adenosine to bind to the brain. So caffeine is a psychoactive stimulant, and it works by binding to the brain to block adenosine. So caffeine has a really big impact on it, and it's extremely powerful for managing sleep. Also taking naps. When you take a nap, you basically do what you do when you sleep, and you flush the adenosine levels down. So taking naps is also a huge impact on adenosine levels. And then after a long nap, you have to build those adenosine levels to have the sleep pressure to ultimately fall asleep at the end of the day. Then we have stress in our chemistry. So in a perfect world with a human physiology, we want to have that spike in cortisol earlier in the day, and we want to have adrenaline and dopamine, and we want to have those peaking in the beginning part of the day, so we can think and so we can concentrate and so we can do intentional actions to help. Well, as we know, folks with Tourette syndrome tend to have cortisol a little bit more dispersed throughout the day. And of course also the same with dopamine. So we already have a little bit of a disadvantage with our chemistry to create this homeostatic sleep drive that's optimal for us. Serotonin, again, same thing. We tend to have decreased serotonin modulation in our brains. So serotonin is that feel-good hormone that you kind of feel in the end of the day, and it kind of helps calm you and relax you. And it also leads to melatonin. And melatonin it kicks off being able to get into sleep. So melatonin is very, very easily influenced by light. And now a lot of people are spending a lot of time with light at the end of the day, and they use it to calm themselves. They watch TV, so we have television, and when they're getting that light exposure in their eyes, and their eyes are picking up the light, their eyes they send messages to the brain, and the brain reacts as though it's getting sunlight, and so it decreases the melatonin, and it says it's not time for melatonin yet. And so melatonin and how we use light and melatonin is really important. Same thing with social media. We get light, we get that cortisol, we get the adrenaline from being a part of social media conversations, or we get into debates um, or we see friends and they're talking about things and we get excited, or maybe we think, oh, why wasn't I invited? And we start getting these chemical these spirals that affect our chemistry. If we wake up in the middle of the night and we turn our lights on to go to the bathroom, again, our brain recognizes the light and thinks it must be sun. And so it drops the melatonin and it's harder to fall asleep again. So light exposure in the middle of the night is extremely detrimental. So anyhow, we have this really predictable chemistry balance that happens in our bodies, and we we can use this as a form of pressure if we use it intentionally to help build sleep. But the secret is we have to be deliberate, we have to be intentional in how we're using it, and we know we're already at a little bit of a disadvantage. So with light, we have it's called a suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's part of our visual system, but rather than rods and cones, and like rather than looking at colors or looking at the acuity of what it is that you're looking at, the suprachiasmatic nucleus only is concerned about light exposure. And it's such a powerful tool for controlling melatonin. So for instance, when you wake up and you get that sunlight in your eyes, the suprachiasmatic nucleus activates your brain to start inspiring it to produce melatonin eventually later on in the day. But this is dependent on light exposure at the right time of the day and getting that light in your eyes and using light to kind of mimic the sun. And of course, we can talk about this maybe in Q&A, but for people with shift work or whatever else, who don't have a predictable schedule, a circadian schedule where they follow the sun, there's ways of using light intentionally to optimize sleep patterns. But it has to be done with intention, and we have to know that we're doing this with like, for somebody with Tourette syndrome, we have to be extra intentional and extra careful and extra aware of how we're using light. Temperature. So our body temperatures fluctuate about 3 degrees every day. You notice where it's really low on the scale, that's indicative of nighttime body temperature. When your body's colder and you're less active, your muscles aren't moving, and your blood isn't circulating as fast, and you're in more of a relaxed and repairing and regrowing state. And also when you're in the warmer temperatures, your muscles are moving, and they're producing your muscles are more able to move with less risk of injury. So when we put this over the homeostatic sleep drive model, you can see temperature is so it really mimics this homeostatic sleep drive, and it's so important as a tool to use for manipulating sleep and for awareness of sleep. Activity, exercise, and digestion. I'm kind of summarizing just for the sake of time, but there's a time of the day for exercise. There's a time of the day for exercise. There's a time of the day for digesting your food and for having your stomach, push the food through and create all that acid and digest the food. And there's also a time of the day for resting and relaxing. And it's really important when you think about homeostatic sleep drive and think about sleep issues, to use these tools wisely for your sleep, to optimize your sleep. Sleep opportunity is that time of the day where we know that it's time to sleep. And there's so many factors of life that are part of sleep opportunity. And there's so many elements of being an adult and stress and mental health. And I work with so many of my clients that I work with, they want to get that promotion, or they feel pressure from work and they need to get that project done. So they push away at their sleep opportunity and they spend time working at night. Or maybe they do that in the evenings and they just are exhausted, but they need to veg out. They feel like they need this time. So they might watch a show on Netflix. And so often the sleep opportunity is um lessened due to things that people are, coping behaviors. But sleep opportunity is such, it's critical for getting a regular, good, consistent night of sleep. So I always tell people to have a plan. So finally, there's sleep pressure. And sleep pressure is basically just a culmination of all of these factors creating a large pressure as the day goes on and putting together a huge chunk of sleep at night. So you build it, build it, build it throughout the day. And then finally, you have so much sleep pressure, your eyes are heavy, you're yawning, and you have to fall asleep. And there's ways of doing this that work really well. So I always like to use the toothpaste analogy where you just roll up that toothpaste and squeeze it all out, and then you're building that pressure, and ultimately, finally, you have a lot of pressure for a big, good sleep. So mental health. Um, Sleep opportunity is not the time for mental health. It's not the time to work on solving your mental health problems. It's not the time to it's often the first time of the day that people have stillness and there's quiet. And so they might think about their mental health, but it's not the time for mental health. We have to schedule mental health during the day. We have to allocate time during the day for our mental health needs. So a lot of times when I work with people with insomnia and they're having mental health issues, we do an exercise where we just write down all of the things they think about at night when they're in bed and they're not sleeping. And then we start allocating time in the day and we work through those things. And if you're not sure what to do, consider a coach, consider a therapist, consider somebody that has tools to help you through this, because there's so many tools out there. But most importantly, it should not be during sleep opportunity. Um, Consistency is absolutely a priority. So waking up and getting that light exposure, we talked about the suprachiasmatic nucleus, every day around the same time. If you find that you're not consistent, get back on track, find the tools that work for you. So it's okay if you like, I like to go to concerts. And so I will sometimes be out at a concert and I know that it might take 2 or 3 days for my sleep to be back on track. But I know that if I follow my plan and I get back to my consistency, I'm going to get back on track with that. But daily consistency is important because our brains follow patterns. So catching up on the weekends on sleep isn't going to help with our brain chemistry creating this sleep pressure that helps us mentally and with our health. Um, Paying attention to time management with intention. So I like to use this. It works so good. It's such an easy tool that I use with my clients. We talk about fixed and variable time management, kind of like with accounting with money. So you have fixed costs and you have variable costs, like your mortgage or your insurance are fixed costs. And maybe if you're going to a birthday party, there's a variable cost. It's it's the same thing with time management. We have fixed time management and we have variable time management. And focusing on what is fixed and how fixed time management works in our schedule is so helpful with sleep. So sleep opportunity is a fixed time. Mental health is a fixed time. I also consider like waking up and brushing your teeth, putting your clothes on, going to work, eating. These are all fixed times in our day, in our daily routine, versus going to a show or watching Netflix. These are variable times. And when we're not careful about how we use variable times, they often start moving into our sleep opportunity. So wind down routine is part of our fixed sleep time. Um, Having a plan for things when things go wrong. First of all, bed behavior. Bed is for sleep. So if you're not sleeping, it's really important that you get out of bed. I know that's really hard to do, but it's so powerful with setting these rhythms and with the programming of your brain. So meditate, stretch, use an app, do hypnosis, progressive relaxation. If you're in your bed for more than 30 minutes and you're awake, get out of bed, don't turn on the lights, try a coping mechanism, experiment, work through, find something that works for you. And then when you feel that pressure, get back in bed. Um, com com compensating for not sleeping is often something that makes the problem worse. So if you have a bad night of sleep and then you drink a bunch of caffeine the next day, or you do long catch-up naps, or you sleep in on the weekends and you do this, really what you're doing is you're teaching your brain that it's unpredictable when to expect light and when to use your neurochemistry. And as I spoke about earlier, for us folks with Tourette and tic disorders, it's so important to have that consistency on a regular basis. If you need help, start the conversation. Um, Talk to anybody, talk to a healthcare professional. Medications offer temporary relief for sleep, but they're often not beneficial for long-term use. Um, there are so many links to excessive use of sleep medications and health problems. Behavioral intervention is considered best practices in most cases of insomnia. Behavior is harder to do. It's not a magic pill. It takes work, it takes effort, but it is so much better for long-term health. Um, so here's my references. I can get a copy of references to anybody that asks. And I really appreciate your time. I just covered a lot of stuff. I went kind of fast. And I really encourage, I hope if anyone has questions that they ask them now, or contact me down the road with questions too. So,
Thank you so much, Ben. What an
cool.
amazing presentation. Like I said earlier, tonight, please take some time to fill out the survey here. The survey link is being dropped in the chat by Dow, and then also the QR code is right here as well, so that you're able to easily access that. So please do that survey for us. We'd really appreciate it. And also, if you have any ideas about programming, either other topics or even expanding on this topic, please feel free to reach us at programideas@tourette.org. And with that being said, Dow, we can start the Q&A portion of tonight.
Sounds great. Thanks, Alexandra. So we have a couple questions for you, Ben, and some of them are more like sharing of experiences, and I want to acknowledge them as well. We have one here from an anonymous attendee saying, I toss and turn so much in my sleep. My spouse says that my limbs hit him throughout the night. I often wake up feeling like I pulled a muscle. Other than my Tourette's and TMJ, I am a healthy and athletic person. I often wake up and never feel rested, though. So they've asked their doctors about it, and they just say, sometimes that's just how some people are. Sorry. I know this is a lot. Maybe someone else will have similar experiences. Can you comment a little bit on that experience, Ben, especially given this conversation with a healthcare provider as well?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for sharing, and it's so valid. And again, this is one of the problems, because unfortunately there's not an easy answer, and there's a million answers, and maybe one of those answers is appropriate for you, but there there I think personally it is worth getting blood work done and looking at potential deficiencies sometimes. If this is something that has come up over and over again and there's no answers, sometimes an iron deficiency, for instance, um, or something like that, there's simple fixes. But again, this is a really difficult thing. And like restless leg syndrome and other limb movements like that are so common, especially in our population. Um, so so it is a difficult thing to deal with. I would say to push your doctor a little bit harder. I know that sometimes they have to document a certain way to justify blood panels. And and yet it's worth understanding more about that and having more answers, because sometimes maybe there is a supplement or something that you can take to help. Um, and so yeah, it's really hard to deal with.
Thanks for answering that question, Ben. Our next question, does having Tourette's mean that your sleep issues should be treated in a different way than someone who does not have Tourette's?
I don't know. That's an awesome question. I mean, I kind of said that, but yet I, I really do tend to treat sleep issues very similar. I feel like my answer to that question is having Tourette means that if you have insomnia, I think you have to work a little harder to work on sleep issues. I think that would be sort of like my general answer here. Um, you know, depend obviously have working with somebody that has tics is different than working with somebody that doesn't have tics, because when your body is moving in a tic as you're trying to fall asleep, it's a different kind of approach. Like it's a different level of empathy and a different level of like understanding that I think some sleep people don't totally get. Um, but still though, the treatment is we go to behavior, we start picking apart like the different aspects of your sleep drive and your sleep behaviors, and we really try to find things for you based on your lifestyle to build that pressure. I will say also, I think like if you think about exercise, incorporating some kind of intentional exercise for folks with Tourette syndrome really helps, because it's just like medication. It's like you're doing an artificial medication to help build that pressure for the end of the day, and you're moving and you're getting some of your energy out. So intentional exercise is definitely one thing that a lot of my clients aren't interested in that, but when I work with folks with Tourette and tic disorders, I really, really try to reinforce the importance of that. So good question.
Yeah, great response. The next one's about like treatment options, Ben. So someone asked thoughts on the effects of SSRIs on Tourette's tic disorders or suggestions for other treatment options.
Yeah. Um, I I think the best answer I can say is I don't know. It's so individualized. I talk to some people and they're amazing. They work great. I talk to some people and they try and they're really frustrated and they're discouraged, and it doesn't work good. And they have extremely strong feelings about it. And you can say the strong feelings happen on both sides. So I don't know the answer, unfortunately. I think that it takes, part of my intention of tonight is I hope that if you're an attendee, I hope you're looking at your nervous system a little closer, and you're understanding a little bit more about your patterns. And the more that you can bring those observations to your psychiatrist or your doctor and talk about them and how they impact you in particular, the hopefully the better treatment you can get. But I wish I had a better answer to that question.
Thanks, Ben. Let's see here. A question from, let's see, the audience on blue light glasses. So, what are your thoughts on blue light glasses? Do they make a difference? Does it depend on when you use them, etc.?
Yeah. Yeah. I did a little bit of an experiment with blue light glasses personally. So I have my anecdotal evidence, but um blue light glasses are great. The problem with blue light glasses is if if you use them too early in the day and your body isn't absorbing the light naturally and getting that natural sunlight, then they can actually have detrimental effects if you're not getting that early exposure to light. So really, if to simplify, if you just think about following the sun pattern. Now, this is of course if you're not a shift worker, or you're not you don't have like something that's causing you like to not follow a traditional circadian pattern. um you really need that light in the beginning of the day. You need that healthy sunlight. I'm not saying look at the sun, but get light exposure in your eyes, and it helps with your hormones and it helps with regulation. So using blue light glasses in the beginning of the day, I tried it for like a month and I felt like a little bit off. And of course, that's my anecdotal evidence, but still, um, I think it's super legit. I think there's a lot to that. At the end of the day, however, if you intentionally use blue light to lessen the light exposure, and maybe even if you watch some television with blue light glasses, or you use the blue light glasses to help kind of push yourself out of light, and I take this to an extreme, and I need to for myself, but it works. I turn all the lights off, and I really am very intentional when I'm on and I'm doing what I know I need to do. I'm really intentional with my exposure to light, and blue light glasses can be a tool to be used for this. So that's the answer. That's the best answer I got, I guess. But there is some anecdotal evidence there on that.
Thanks, Ben, for that response.
Mhm.
Let's see here. I think we have time for maybe like 2 or 3 more questions, but what is the best way to manage tics if they are thrown into overdrive upon awaking from a nightmare or due to nightmares?
Um, so when I work with clients on stuff like this, first of all, it's so hard. It's so hard. And there's a lot of people that um have that, like, where you're that experience where you're frozen and you're still experiencing a nightmare and you're not able to move. Your brain hasn't fully transitioned out of that state, and it's very scary too. Um, so this is a really, really challenging area for folks with tics, and folks in general. But I like to start with the basics. What do you know that works the best for you? And how can you start reminding yourself to use that? So I love using breath work with folks, but there's some people that hate breath work, and they actually find it to be more triggering. But breath work is a really easy way, because you can use the breath work to um, activate your autonomic nervous system and connect to your vagus nerve really efficiently, sighing out loud or doing a long exhale. Really, like, inhale, focus, count to 8, and exhale the whole time. That really gets your autonomic nervous system out of the sympathetic overdrive and more into a parasympathetic state. So that might be one tool, like a long exhale. But for some people, that's not the case. So again, go to your toolbox, find the things that whenever whenever your tics are really bad, what's the tool that you do? And then start rehearsing and rehearsing, and then telling yourself, when I come out of a nightmare, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to find it. I'm going to find that tool. Sometimes it's hard to find, but I'm going to find it, and I'm going to do my best to use it. Or maybe it's a few tools, but really you have to experiment with this, and recognize that this is hard, but there is a way of working on your response to feel more control in your body. Awesome question.
Great. Let's see here. I think we have time maybe for 1 or 2 more, Ben. Let's see here. We have Leanne from our audience here. After years of efforts at quote unquote natural treatment, so like no caffeine, cold, being in the dark, no TV in the room, lavender, melatonin supplements, etc., the only thing that has ever worked for them is medication. Are there any studies that indicate reliance on meds is any worse than not getting quality sleep at all?
Yeah, awesome question. I don't know if there's a study on that. It's possible. I haven't found that study, but, like, yeah, it's pretty legit, right? You've tried everything and you're desperate. And in some cases, medication is really helpful. And you know, part of this whole thing, like, if when I analyze sleep with people, we're creating a big spotlight on sleep, and sometimes that creates stress. And not sleeping creates a lot of stress, and overthinking about not sleeping and over trying creates stress. And so it's really important. So my answer is two parts. First of all, I don't know of a study on that, and I think that would be an awesome study. Um, Second of all, I think if in your case you found something, it's working for you, wonderful. I personally still feel like it might be worth it, and maybe if you want to talk to me, call me and we can talk about this. But it might be worth it to still start incorporating behaviors while on medication. Start incorporating things that create a little extra pressure. Like this is where the CBTI might work, depending, and possibly you've already tried that, but try to do something while still on the medication, but pushing yourself in a behavioral direction. And then know that there's the possibility of weaning the medication if you find that you're starting to feel that sleep pressure. So I've had a lot of clients where they absolutely will not go off of medication, but they want to try to work on behavioral interventions, and we'll start there. And then once we establish a lot of success, we can slowly start working with their doctors on titrating that medicine. And the doctors are usually really interested in titrating very slowly. And there's a lot of protocols to doing that in a very small, subtle way. But it does take some collaboration on healthcare professionals. It takes a little work. And I think it's worth it personally.
Ben, do you have time for one more question
Oh
from our
yeah, I
audience
have
before we
time.
wrap it up? Okay,
For sure.
Hannah from our audience is asking, sometimes I dream one night and the next night the exact same dream will repeat itself or continue where it left off. Happened more as a child than as an adult. I also have ADHD, OCD, and anxiety. I'm wondering if this is also due to hyperactive chemicals in the brain. And we'll wrap it up after that question.
Okay, awesome question. And again, I'll just say this in case people are tuning out. Thank you guys so much for showing up.
Mhm.
Okay, so I have that question from folks with ADHD, anxiety, Tourette, tic disorders. I also have this is a very similar complaint or observation, I should say, from everybody that I work with on sleep. So having repeated dreams is a very human condition. And unfortunately, I'd love to talk and give you like a 30-minute answer on this, but dreaming is an amazing way that our brains kind of do therapy on ourselves and process and recreate scenarios so we can be prepared for future events. So having a repeated dream is I understand some repeated dreams or nightmares can be really traumatic or scary or whatever else, but it's really common to have repeated dreams. And it might be a really awesome thing to work with a therapist on also and do some dream work. There's a lot of tools for that. I wouldn't think of it as something that would be extremely concerning. But again, it's a very common and human thing, not just with your brain in particular. So so it's not like a terrible warning signal when you have the same dream over and over again. So yeah, awesome question.
Great. And then that wraps up our Q&A session. I know we had a lot more extra questions, Ben, so we're letting our audience members know to reach out to programs@tourette.org and we'll pass along the questions to you.
Yeah, and you can also just email my website too. Send an email on my website. I will answer every one of them, I promise you. So yeah.
Amazing.
All right.
Well, thank you so much, Ben, for an amazing presentation. And thank you so much to our attendees for joining us tonight. We appreciate you so much. Please fill out the survey. You can use that QR code, like I said, or that link is also dropped in the chat. We really appreciate you taking the time to fill it out. And like I said, it allows us to host more programs like this in the future. But that being said, again, thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you guys.